because discouragement manifests itself in behaviors that can reflect withdrawal or maladaptive coping measures that they may use. You could look at signs such as like reduced participation or absenteeism, person that's very defensive. These can all be indicators of discouragement. And, regular check-ins will also allow a leader to detect feelings of inadequacies kind of early on. So I say you would really need to emphasize the importance of having a non-judgmental space.
So in our conversation today with Hallie Williams, a clinical psychotherapist and an Adlerian about workplace, and one of the things that we all want in workplace is cohesion. We want everyone to feel significance and belonging. But how do we get there? So we will ask Hallie some of the ways that we can create inclusivity. We can invite people to feel wholesome and capable and all that good stuff. So Hallie, we're going to just start off by biggest question. How can leader foster belonging at work?
That is a very good question. I think that foster belonging by emphasizing, it's a word that we Adlerians use called social interest, which is basically a genuine concern about others, the welfare of others. That might be the best way or the easiest way to conceptualize it. So as a leader, I believe you'd want to foster social interest because that's a core Adlerian principle. That's basically what the entire theory is kind of based on. We could do that through encouraging cooperation. Adler talked about that all humans are kind of rooted in this connection that we have with one another. So if we believe that leaders can create opportunities for team members to collaborate meaningfully, you would want to create what I would call psychological safety. One of Adler's disciples, if I could call him that, was Rudolf Dreikers. He talked about that in one of his books. Individuals need to be able to feel safe to express themselves without fear of judgment. I think leaders should celebrate diversity and ensure that every voice is heard. And it also helps by recognizing individual contributions, the things that people do. So, you could kind of do this through things like assigning cross-departmental projects where team members collaborate based on their strengths to make sure that each contribution is acknowledged. A person, could tell whether you're paying attention to what they do. And this kind of reinforces mutual respect and also collective achievement with everybody together. You could also do things like have inclusive celebrations. When you have diversity and you have people from many different cultures, I think it helps to have things at the office or at your place of business where you're kind of celebrating the diversity that you have there, the different events. It could be holidays, milestones, those kinds of things help promote inclusivity and, as I mentioned earlier, psychological safety.
I love this conversation, Hallie. And one of the company's leaders that I was speaking with, they highlight different team members and they highlight, what their accomplishments were and what they're good at. So everyone is able to receive or being acknowledged for their strength. So we know as leaders, we want to get everyone to feel collaborative and create these environment, understanding the various cultural backgrounds and abilities that are present. How should leaders navigate team differences?
That's going to require fostering understanding and respect. Adlerian theory highlights the uniqueness of each individual's experience. And again, most of the things that I talk about involving this will come from either Adler, my interpretation of Adler, and Dreikers. Dreikers had a book, I believe it was The Courage to be Imperfect, and that's something that we talk about quite a bit. So by promoting empathy, leadership encourage open dialogue to understand each team member's needs and viewpoints. So that requires a lot of conversations to get to know your people. Also, you should value diversity through maybe problem solving when issues come up. Look at what each team member can provide and view it as a strength rather than a challenge. So you want to I think leaders should frame the differences between people, not so much as a problem, but as an asset, and then try to facilitate learning from one another. One thing first is I used to coach basketball, and I've coached a lot of different things, but each individual on the team does not have the same skills, but you understand what those skills are and you get people to work together for the benefit of the entire organization or the team. But you have to first know what those differences are. So then I don't look at a difference of a person being tall. That's a value that a person has, but a short person has a value too, because the short team member on my team can do something different that we need done that the tall guy could not do. So I try to look at all these differences as an asset versus, a liability. Like I think a leader could organize workshops where the employees do role plays to kind of practice showing empathy and understanding and developing strategies that you could use for other collaborative problem solving that you'd be using later on. So, things like that, or cross-cultural training, things that highlight diverse perspectives, which comes through conversation. Having a genuine concern with a person, it allows you to get to know them and view their differences, again, as I said, as strengths, not barriers. So a lot of this, I think, just comes down to, again, as I mentioned, social interest being that piece that means you have a genuine concern about people. So you want to know about them, and then you use those differences as benefits versus liabilities.
Sounds like in this case, the leader is taking a lot of time getting to know the assets of their team members, so they already know the value that they can bring. So perhaps you can talk about some of the ways that we can collaborate or get to know our team members.
It's just spending time with them. And I think sometimes when you have an organization, the bottom line becomes more important than the people. You'd be surprised the number of times that problems can come up and a person came to the job with skills already that the manager does not even know about. So when things come up at the job, they don't realize that they have a solution right there. Somebody that works for them is skilled in that area, but you may not have been hired for that. We all come to the table with additional skills. Some of that is from the part of the country we came from, the way we were brought up, the things that we've done in the past. These are all additional benefits that an employer gets when you hire somebody. So often HR may know a little bit more about the person, but those questions are generally geared to just the particular job that you're going to do. Rarely do you have any questions that talk to you as an individual. Like, what are you about? What kinds of things have you learned? How do you spend your free time? What are your hobbies like? What do you like to do? Just those kinds of questions. Sometimes you get those over lunch at a job, but often everybody doesn't eat lunch together. Managers don't usually eat with their subordinates. So you have to be very intentional in wanting to know about a person. And I think that should be mandatory when you have someone that works for you, that you have an idea of all of those things. And plus, this also adds into social interest and a belief of someone caring for you. If you take the time to ask those questions, it makes a big difference. We find that same thing in relationships. If a guy was dating a young lady, for instance, and you're asking questions about her, what does she do, this, that, it indicates that you have a genuine concern, and that means a lot to people. So I think it's mandatory that a manager takes the time to intentionally ask questions and just spend time with an individual. And I think that's the best way to really get to know them and understand them better.
So let's talk about discouragement. How can leaders spot someone who's discouraged, and what are the steps to sort of help this employee?
That's a very good question. That's something that comes up even in therapy, because discouragement manifests itself in behaviors that can reflect withdrawal or maladaptive coping measures that they may use. You could look at signs such as like reduced participation or absenteeism, person that's very defensive. These can all be indicators of discouragement. And, regular check-ins will also allow a leader to detect feelings of inadequacies kind of early on. So I say you would really need to emphasize the importance of having a non-judgmental space for discussion, because you have to, you need to talk to people. Some places do have one-to-one check-ins with a regular scheduled time for individual meetings for an employee to just find out, are you having any particular challenges or concerns? And so you want to create a space so early intervention can be done, and of course, as a good manager, you want to monitor performance trends and, whatever the engagement metrics are for your organization. And it could be like participation in meetings. A person comes to a meeting, but they never have anything to say. Are there meeting project timelines? Are you seeing little things that indicate they're being withdrawn? So I think by looking at things like that, it allows you to early on detect discouragement. Adlerian theory, encouragement is a big thing. And I think of encouragement as basically lending you some of my courage, for you to feel better about what you're doing. But I need to identify these things early so I can make you feel more comfortable that you can do this job and you understand we're on the same team. If a person feels inadequately or strong feelings of inferiority, they can be discouraged. It's not really unusual. So, but when you identify that, basically as a manager, you should lend some of your courage to this individual. Let them know they can do it. Make them feel like they can. Catch things early before you get so deep into a root that it's very, very difficult to pull them out of that bad space that they're in.
And Adlarians are still good at even taking someone who's extremely discouraged out of that discouragement. Or what are 1 or 2 or 5 tools that you can talk about? Someone's listening to this podcast. They have an employee. They've missed the boat. They missed some sign signals. And they really want to help this employee who's extremely discouraged. What are the first few steps? And then how do you build on that?
I wouldn't say that it's always going to be identical, but the general theme is you want to have already established a relationship so that this individual will talk to you. In other words, it's very difficult if you haven't spent any time with a person and then you come in late in the game and now you want to make some adjustments. So I think it's important that you establish early on that social interest or that genuine concern that I do care about you. And I think you want to get the person kind of motivated to want to make a change. Even that motivation is rooted in social interest. So I think identifying that, first of all, is one of the big things. I think focusing on shared goals, establishing that we're on the same team. As a matter of fact, I had a parent that I was just talking to recently that was having some problems with their son and lack of motivation and didn't seem like they wanted to do anything. And I mentioned to the, father and mother, because the child wasn't there. And I mentioned to them is that, first of all, we should understand just what is the object here? What are we trying to do? What is the goal? If for a parent, maybe it's just producing a well-mannered, motivated child into an adult that can take care of themselves and not having anybody take advantage of them and that they're morally sound. Maybe that's the goals together. So then you explain to the child, we're on the same team. So now we start focusing on the goals that we're trying to accomplish. The goals that, as described, would be acceptable to the child, but you use that same thing in the company. Once we establish that we have some shared goals and we align our goals together, then I want them to understand that we're on the same team, that we're trying to do the same thing, that it's not just you're not just there, but I'm there too. And we're both trying to do exactly the same thing. I want you to be successful. The more successful you are, the most successful the entire organization are. The better you feel, the better I feel. So I would use that as the premise, and I would look through those lens of social interest and establishing that same team environment. And that's what I would use to kind of solve the issue. Whether I would say it would be the same 5 steps every time, I think that's going to vary with the situation, with the individual, because people may need something different. We're all unique individuals with our own unique creativity. But if it's viewed through the lens of social interest, a genuine concern for a person, and allowing them to know that, hey, we're on the same team, I think that's the starting point to resolve those issues.
When we have an active conflict, how can we use motivation?
I would say encouraging responsibility. Individuals that's motivated are more likely to take ownership of their roles in a conflict. If you'll do that, it allows to faster resolution. Disputes that arise during conflicts, we should focus more on discussions or shared objectives. Kind of the same thing I was saying earlier. You want to reframe the conflict, find out exactly what it is, and then turn that conflict into a opportunity. Instead of it being a conflict, it's an opportunity for us to get better. It's an opportunity for us to collectively progress and get better. I think also when it's a conflict between 2 people, and I've done this in sports, you get, for instance, I had my whole team line up, I'll name an individual, and then the rest of the players needed to talk about that particular individual's strengths. Not anybody else, but that particular person. And they would tell me all the strong points about that person. And this was without preparation. So it wasn't like they went home and thought about it. On the spot, they need to tell me something, articulate the strengths that this other individual has. And I would do that with the different players, not all the same day, but when I line them up, I pick one. So The same thing in conflicts at a business. Individuals can be encouraged to articulate the strengths of another person. It fosters a mutual respect and accountability because I'm acknowledging your strong suits. The conflict, I might be talking about some negative things around you. My interaction causes them to focus on those positive things, the strengths that an individual has. And I think that tends to lessen the conflict mood, and it causes respect for each individual and accountability for individuals.
And how do we build trust as leaders?
Well, as a leader, I think that's from, consistency, being the same way, treating people the same way, being transparent, definitely showing mutual respect, which again is that, that framework of social interest, having a genuine concern, because that's going to lend to mutual respect. I think you also want to model integrity. When I talked about consistency being the same, I'm conducting myself a certain way. I spent a few years in the Army, and one of the things in military leadership is about leading by example. So you want to model integrity, and it shows an example for team people to feel that you're fair and you're reliable and you're going to be the same way every time. It's a very confusing situation when you're one way on Monday, a different way on Tuesday. That's not going to help you build trust, and I think also fostering teamwork to build independence and trust among members. I think that helps a lot. And again, my experience is even with the communication being consistent, with the information that needs to go out, weekly updates to make sure people understand how some of the decision-making takes place. Again, I think I mentioned earlier about collaborative goal setting. It's clear we're working on the same thing, the same project. We're all in this seat together. And I think that also allows you to take ownership, of whatever is going on. So I think that all fosters trust more than anything. I think it's just about being consistent, the same way every time. You can depend on me to be this way. And it's clear as to what's going on. I'm not keeping a lot of secrets. We know what we're trying to do. I would trust leaders like that, and I think most people would.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you were speaking, one of the things that pops up for me over and over is the fact that when they have had a chance in creating the goals. So it's not the goals that are of top down, but they're collaborative in nature where everyone's had a buy-in. And now we're figuring out the step. And I think you brought that up before as well in problem solving, that the solutions come from everyone and not always the leader. So the leader doesn't have to hold all the cards, but it's shared and it's so freeing.
Well, on that too, I would add that this is a place where a leader is a facilitator. You want them to collaboratively be involved, but sometimes you have to kind of lead a little bit. You facilitate that meeting. It's not so much, it is, I guess a word facilitator could be construed to be teacher. And yes, that is very similar, but you want to make sure you're leading that discussion so a person doesn't feel like they're left out. I think that's one of the big things, but that's just right in line with what you're saying.
Why is empathy essential in leadership?
Empathy allows leaders to kind of understand the emotional and the practical needs of their team. Adlerian theory would tell us that empathy strengthens the social bonds, and that also foster cooperation. It also kind of empathy emphasizes the role in diffusing tensions and facilitating open dialogue. I mean, you're not, as a leader, you don't want to necessarily be upset, angry when you're trying to solve conflicts. That's making the tensions worse. You want to diffuse the tensions. So having empathy allows you to diffuse tensions and facilitate, dialogue when people have disagreements. I think it's important for a leader to actively listen to each party's perspective, not move too fast, taking anybody's side, and demonstrate through your conversation that you understand and you can validate the feelings that a person has. I think that's pretty important. You should be flexible in the solutions for the team members. I mean, it could be something as similar or simple as having maybe a modified schedule. Maybe the conflict is over, getting to work on time or getting off on time or something like that. So you may do something like modifying the schedule if that promotes cohesion. So a lot of it depends on just what the conflict is. But my point with that is that in solving the conflict or mediating the conflict, the first and most important thing, I think, is having good listening skills. It's nothing worse than a person to have an issue or some type of conflict and you are multitasking when they're trying to explain something to you. And then you could say, well, I'm listening, but you're not actively listening if you're doing everything else at the same time the person is talking to you. So if nothing else, be an active listener. And you match that along with your empathetic nature, and I think it makes it a lot easier to be a conflict mediator.
Mm-hmm. Extremely important. However, we have leaders from different backgrounds, different mindsets, and different belief systems. And often we understand the description of leadership means different things to different people. And often not we, but there have been situations where a leader believes that their job is to get the job done. Yeah. And what you just shared is, well, that alone is not going to cut it. If we don't have empathy and people don't feel safe, they're not able to relate to us, then chances are you can't get any of the work done, even if your belief is, hey, I'm going to get this work done or produce this much, whatever that might be, and the profitability.
Yes. I've often said to managers that I've been around, I have a pretty good bit of experience in management. I've been the vice president of a mortgage company, been an executive director of nonprofits, director of operations of a software company. So I've done a lot of different kinds of management. With the people that I've talked to, I would let them know, because sometimes they think you're taking too much time with a person. But my thing is, if you want to, as the expression goes, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, then we got to go together. So taking that time is very important. It's beneficial to the company. And having that empathy is it's mandatory. It's mandatory if you're going to be a good manager, a good leader.
Absolutely. So as a good leader, feedback. Let's talk about feedback. How can we speak so others can hear what we have to say?
Well, again, I think the first thing is, establishing a relationship so that people would listen to you. I think you want to be very encouraging when you say things. As a public speaker, for instance, you have to be very careful the things you say in an open forum. If I say the wrong words in the earlier part of a presentation, effectively cause that person to shut down, and all the good things I may say after that, they don't even hear that because I've already said something that's caused them to shut down. I have to know my audience, and I have to be particular about the things that I say based on the audience that I have there. And the same thing when you're talking to people as a leader, you want to be careful about that, which again goes back to, if you have this social interest or genuine concern, if you're doing some of the things that we've mentioned earlier, then you're going to know more about the person that you're talking to, and you'll know more about how to address them. You can't always address all of your employees the same way. So I think it's important on how you talk to a person. This also will encourage them to listen to what you're saying so that you can actually reach them, if that answers your question.
It does. I'm thinking a lot about leadership and feedback and just significance and belonging in different teams. You've already talked about the empathy portion of it, the conflict resolution. And one thing you earlier talked about is when someone is tardy, they might not show up. And you were talking about maybe they are going to ask a lot of questions. Perhaps they're going to almost like apathetic behavior. For each of those behaviors, the 4 possibilities, what are some of the things that leaders can do when they notice specifically if someone seems demotivated? What can we do to get them back, in addition to having that relationship with them or to have conversations with them?
What you're describing sounds like an individual that's discouraged. So as I mentioned earlier, it's about, I use the word sharing my courage because as a leader, I should be able to do that to get a person in a better space. So basically that's encouragement.
How do you share your courage?
Sharing my courage and encouragement being the same thing. I do that through nurturing confidence and resilience. And what I want to do, discouragement often is a lack or a strong feeling of inferiority. So to combat that, I focus on the strengths of the individuals and reinforce positive behaviors and achievements that the person has done to promote self-efficacy. I want to kind of promote a growth mindset versus strengthening those feelings of inferiority. For instance, with a child, if a child begins to walk and they fall down, and we're very critical of them falling down, that's going to reinforce an innate feeling of inferiority because, yes, they did fall. And you keying on the fact that they're falling versus making them understand that this is kind of like part of the process. You want to celebrate those small wins and encourage them and let them know that this is part of the growth. When I talked about growth mindset, you want an individual to know that these shortcomings that we may be dealing with is all part of the growth. To be a great basketball player or basketball shooter, you don't shoot one shot. If you miss 5, that's part of the process. That's your body adjusting, figuring out the best way to do it. You will get better by continuing to do it, but you can't just let that hold you back, which could be a natural tendency to have feelings of inferiority. So back to business, I said what you would want to do is celebrate the small wins, acknowledge individual achievement during team meetings or when they successfully complete a task. Make it your point to mention that because this is going to encourage that growth mindset. You want them to know that this is kind of part of the process. Also, at your job, you could have skill development training, like certain kinds of training that you offer to the employees, and this training that can line up with strengths that you've already identified that they have. So I think all of this establishes a growth mindset, which helps them stay encouraged. They don't feel so bad about maybe shortcomings that they have because we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on the strengths. And whatever that shortcoming is, this is part of the process. We're just going to continue to build these positive behaviors, doing things the right way, keep them understanding that it's a growth mindset, and this will keep them encouraged. So basically what you're doing is letting them borrow some of your courage by highlighting things. Again, things that I tell leaders is punishment, if you call it that, writing up a person or whatever it may be, that should always be done in private. But praise, adulation, that should be done in public. You want to acknowledge this because this all makes a person feel good. Who does not feel good if you're in a meeting and I call you out and I highlight something in particular that you did? As long as it's legitimate, I don't want to just be throwing compliments and it's not something that's real. But highlighting this, it encourages you. You feel better about it. So again, to get back to the original question, how do I lend my encouragement? It's through those things I just described because I control those meetings. I can determine what's going to be said in the meetings, and I make sure that I highlight your small wins and continue to develop you as an individual.
So truly taking the time and investing and putting the empathy that you were speaking about, just really you put yourself in the shoes of other and what they might feel sort of until they're able to stand on their own 2 feet. You're just going to walk with them. You spoke also about training. So what are some of the components that we must include in training so that we have diverse environments? We have folks who think differently. They have different strains and different skill levels and languages nowadays. And, it's a melting pot everywhere you go. We're rich with beautiful cultures. What are the few of the things that we should consider in a training plan for each organization?
Well, I think it should, again, and I know I've mentioned this over and over and over, but I can't help it because I'm an Adlerian, but we have to have emphasis on social interests. We have to have emphasis on some training that focuses on community building and collaborative problem solving. Not so much individual. Certainly we have to work individually at work, but I want to keep a focus on community building. Secondly, I would say conflict resolution skills. All leaders have got to be able to navigate differences constructively. You want to have skills involving conflict resolution. Again, empathy development. Incorporate, some kind of practices that will allow you to enhance what I would call emotional intelligence, understanding, and this is a problem sometimes, having the emotional intelligence to understand that a problem is developing or that something, or you're missing signals with a person, that they may be having a problem in their life and it shows on their face, but emotionally you're missing all of that. So we want to have some degree of emotional intelligence and definitely, based on what you were saying earlier, cultural competence. All cultures are not identical. Certainly, we are all humans. We're all the same. We're all from the family of humanity. but we may have grown up in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. Some things that we may do, that I may do, may be different than what you do, but we don't know that. We need to be competent culturally. These kinds of things you would want to do it at your place of business to make sure we have some training in that. We could have simulated conflict resolution exercises where we practice aligning an individual in a team. That's one thing. I think we could have training on developing emotional intelligence through films that we could use. It's a variety of things. Bring in a trainer if necessary, but you want to have some kind of workshops or something like that involving empathy and cultural competence, because it gives leaders the tools that they need to understand diverse perspectives, because it's a great value in that. I tell people many times, one of the easier way to explain it is, on my hand, I have 5 fingers. Each one of them do something differently. But because they all work in unison, it gives my hand great strength. If I told 2 of my fingers, you're not going to be included, then it's many things that I would not be able to hold on to. There's no way that my hand will be as strong as it's meant to be. It's strong because I'm using all of them together. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's the way we're supposed to be. We survive and we thrive because we work together. So, these are things I think you definitely want to develop, the social interest, the conflict resolution skills, developing that empathy and emotional intelligence. I just think that that's modern leadership. That's how we should focus as a leader.
Yes. Dr. Adler spoke, he definitely was ahead of his time, and he talks about social interest. And he also spoke about holism. Often in our workplace, we believe, we work for our team and our departments. However, can you speak to holism in the world's view and how that would work, fit into the workplace as well?
We are human beings, and we're part of the same family of humanity. And a problem that occurs often when people are isolated or feel pushed to the edges of society, that also can include pushed to the edges of a workplace. You feel disenchanted because you're not part of the whole. Everybody is missing out. Those people that we push to the edge are missing out, but the organization is missing out also. Sometimes a business could fall prey to the illusion of inclusion. You might think you are pulling things together, but in fact, you may not be. I look at, it's much controversy across the country now about diversity and inclusion. And the example I use with my hand explains how important it is to have differences. This is how we survive. If I'm not a part of humanity, who am I? I can't be a lion. Lions are not taking applications for any more people coming in there. They just want lions. We're too weak to do that. So I have to be included. And that same feeling of being left out could be at your job if you don't focus on inclusion, if you don't make that a real focal point. I guess I would say that I would look at that as being the real focal point. I mean, leaders got to embrace diversity as a strength. This expresses Adler's vision of a society that's based on mutual respect and cooperation. All of us benefit, all of us work together, all of us grow at the same time.
And we need one another.
Absolutely.
Every body part that we have, I have Deb Owen talks about it often. It's like, you have your arms, you have your legs, but if you injure your leg, chances are you're going to start to limp. When you start to limp, your hips might hurt. And then before you know it, your back goes out. So when there is a problem within our community, in our workplace, when someone is struggling, chances are we're all going to feel the different things that come up. And together, when everyone is unison, working to support one another, it's much more easy and collaborative, and everyone feels capable, and productivity increases, morale increases, ability to, come up with new ideas and information. And it's just a beautiful thing when that happens. And there is a way, there is an option to get there. There are different steps. Like you said, there are trainings out there. And for you and I who are doing this podcast, our hope is to bring some encouragement to every person. That includes the leader, the team member, new manager that was just probably thrown right into the job and they're just figuring it out. But they're not alone, because there's a whole bunch of us who are out there who really are the cheerleaders. There are a lot of amazing opportunities in Adlerian societies that you can attend different workshops. You can learn more about it. And when we feel better within ourselves, chances are the way we're going to look through these glasses is going to be a little bit clearer than when we're hurting and we're seeing from that hurt. So, Hallie, what inspires you about future leadership?
It's been a lot of things that, as I look around the country, around the world, and it's probably always been this way as we look back through history also. Many of the great movements that happened during the civil rights era was done by young people. I have a reinforced belief in the value of young people and youth-led social initiatives. Young leaders today are, they're championing a lot of causes, sustainability, equity. I actually feel like young people seem to be more accepting of each other. Maybe we as adults, it's hard to change some things depending on how we grew up, but young people seem to be more accepting of differences between other people and other groups and other ideas. They recognize things like, you look at the major push across the world for climate issues. Much of that is being led by young people. You look at gun violence in America. Much of that push is being led by young people pushing for change. I have a reinforced belief in young people and their ability to keep the focus on the things that need to be changed. Sometimes we need a little push. Sometimes we need a big push. But certainly I see a push coming from there. I wish there is more young people that champion these causes, because I think it could make a change. I also think that I look at technology as a benefit instead of a hindrance. I mean, it can certainly be dangerous, no doubt. But I look at the positive that could come from some of these things. I look at AI, for instance. We don't really know all of the benefits and all of the good or bad that can come from it. I think getting AI feedback tools can help leaders tailor recognition and, about what's going on, and maybe create equitable solutions, something that's fair for everybody. I would imagine, but I haven't done this, but I would imagine if you asked AI about solving social problems, AI would not exclude people based on race, ethnicity, gender, orientation. It will just give you an answer, an unbiased answer. I'm hoping, because AI is not an individual, but I also don't believe that it's innately bigoted. So I look at the value that could come from this enhanced inclusivity that would come from AI. And I look at the great benefits. And of course, this could extend over many different platforms, but that's the area that I look at most of all. As an Adlerian, my biggest thing is I feel like we should all be able to get along with each other. If a person thinks that something is wrong with someone because of their complexion or orientation, that indicates a dysfunction with that individual, because it doesn't stand up under reason. We're all the same, and we thrive and we survive because we work together. This is why we're the most powerful creature on this earth. It's not because we're the strongest. We're not the fastest. We can't live outside or just eat food or just kill something to eat it with our bare hands. We're not an animal. I mean, animals don't want us. We're too weak. But what we can do is we can work together. As we do this podcast, you're sitting in your location in a beautiful home, a beautiful chair, your desk is wonderful. We dress nicely, but none of the stuff that we have on or none of the stuff that we're using, did we create it? All of these things were created by other humans for our benefit. We do this, the work that you do daily. It's not just for you. You're doing things for other people. You put together a podcast because you want the world to be different. You want the world to be better. This is how we survive. This is how we thrive. So when individuals can't see that and they're caught up on bigoted views, that's an indication that something is wrong with that person. They need help. That's a dysfunction, because what cannot be refuted is that we survive and thrive when we work together. So my hope is that between the young people and some of the technology, maybe we can add clarity to the mission of humanity and what we can do. Because I stand here reinforced with the belief that we can make a change. But if it is to be, it's up to me. Each one of us need to adopt that mantra. We can make a change if we desire to make a change. So I don't want to go too deep on my soapbox, but that's my belief and that's my hope for the future.
Thank you for your beautiful hope for the future. And I truly agree that together we are going to survive, thrive, and then some. And I know that the world is changing. The youth, I used to lead schools, and every time there were conflicts, you go and you just watch these young ones explore, or the elementary and middle school, the way they just come up with the ideas that are outside of the box. And the world is beautiful. Humanity is purposeful. There are some ups and downs, and together we can really empower one another. So let's tomorrow wake up, go to work, and see how we can make a difference in someone else's life for better, and how we can enjoy the community, the work, so that when we come home, we have positive energy left for our families. Thank you for joining us for Now Jagged Edge podcast. My guest, Hallie Williams, thank you for being here today. Stay tuned for a lot more. I am speaking with Eder Cuevas, and he is also speaking about sports and Montessori. And Ricardo is speaking about workplace. How do we collaborate, do documentation, and more? So till next time, I'm Yogi Patel on Jagged Edge Podcast.